And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome on board. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook. It is Thursday, May 16th, and this outlook is for Friday into Saturday. Starting out with the sea ice, it continues to retreat or melt off to the north this time of year. This has been a gradual process because below normal temperatures have persisted along areas of the west and southwest coast, and that'll be the case here through the end of this month. We anticipate below normal temperatures to continue here down along areas of Norton Sound and especially along the YK deltas. But the ice is melting off, openings are occurring, so there is a little wave action now beginning to be present in those areas. And as we get into the spring hunting season and so forth, be able to have to keep an eye on the various winds and wave issues that may come up. But in the meantime, we've had one windy system come in that caused some inclement weather along the west coast. That system is later tonight into early Friday, pushing toward the interior and dissipating. Secondary low, not very strong. That thing will just head east, southeast, and weaken further. This is the next main low that's going to impact areas along the west coast, Alaska Peninsula, into the Aleutians. This low is heading southeastward, and as we get into Friday afternoon, it'll be located in the central Bering. With some snow and mixed precipitation approaching Nunavik Island and the south side there of St. Lawrence Island. By the time we get into, though, Friday, or I should say Saturday, this low then will kind of split. We'll have the original low tucking into Bristol Bay and weakening as this secondary low on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula takes shape just south-southwest of Kodiak Island, and that feature will head northeastward and bring some rain and breezy conditions along the Gulf Coast, pushing into the Panhandle as we get into Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening. So the marine forecast for the southeast, inner channels, northwest winds 10 knots there at Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance, waves a couple of feet. Look for south winds 10 knots there, Lynn Canal with waves a couple of feet. The outer coast, south of Sitka, look for generally south-southwest winds 10 to 15 knots, swells 4 or 5 feet. Variable winds west of Gustavus and outside of Yakutat Bay only around 5 knots with swells of 3 to 4 feet. And then on Saturday, look for south winds continuing Stevens Passage on up into Lynn Canal at about 15 knots, waves 2 to maybe as high as 3 feet in Lynn Canal. Northwest winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves there, Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, south of Gustavus, look for northwesterly winds generally around 15 knots with swells of 5 feet. Westerly winds 10 knots there outside of Yakutat Bay with swells of 4 feet. Winds within Prince William Sound will be variable around 10 knots on Friday with 2-foot waves. East winds 10 to 15 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Northeast winds 15 knots off the Kenai coast, and then westerly winds lower Cook Inlet at 15 knots and waves a few feet. For Saturday, variable winds around 10 knots continue within Prince William Sound with a couple of foot waves. Variable winds around 10 knots, southeasterly 15 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and around Middleton Island with waves a few feet. Strongest winds will be east-southeast there at the entrance and lower portion of Cook Inlet with swells of 4 to 5 feet. Across Kodiak Island, winds will be west-northwest on Friday, 20 knots. They will turn around more toward the south and 15 knots on the North Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots there, especially north of Cold Bay. And then on Saturday, we have that low kind of splitting, the original low coming and approaching Bristol Bay while a secondary low takes shape right in this area between Chiknik and Akiak. So east-southeast winds, 25 knots around Kodiak Island, 30 knots there just east there of Chiknik, with swells of 8 feet. On the backside, circulation, we look at southwest to west winds 25 knots, waves 6 feet on the North Pacific side, 5 to 7 feet on the Bering side. Winds across the eastern Aleutians on Friday will be south-southwest, 20 to 25 knots Nikolsky through Unalaska, but southwesterly at 15 knots back toward Atka, and then they shift to the northwest around 15 knots west of Adak through Kiska and Shimia. For Saturday, winds will be generally out of the west-northwest, 20-25 knots across the eastern Aleutians, and then turn back around to the southeast at 20 knots once you get west of Adak and pick up to as high as 30-knot southeasterly winds around Shimia. Along the southwest coast, we have west winds at 15 knots on Friday within Bristol Bay, Southeast winds to 20 knots there within Kuskokwim Bay through Etolan Strait, and generally southeast to east winds 15 knots there along the lower Yukon Delta, easterly 10 knots out of Norton Sound, and southerly winds from St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George at 25 knots with swells of 8 to 9 feet. With that low swinging down toward Bristol Bay and redevelopment here southwest of Kodiak Island Saturday afternoon, east winds 25 to 30 knots within Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, but look for northeasterly flow out of Norton Sound and parallel down along the lower Yukon Delta at 15 knots to St. Matthew and then turning northwesterly around the Pribilofs. Finally, for the areas south of the Bering Strait, winds will generally be east-southeast 15 to 20 knots. We look for southeasterly winds continuing through the lower Bering Sea on Friday. Still plenty of ice in place, and then kind of a mixed bag of winds, either west or northerly 5 to 10 knots along the Arctic coast. Winds become more easterly there along the Arctic coast, Kaktovik through Utqiagvik, 15 knots, 20 knots there near Wainwright. And then look for northeasterly winds down across the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, as well as off of the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Winds will be northeasterly around 15 knots. And where there is some open water, swells could be 2 to 3 feet on Saturday.